The moon does not apologize for her light. Neither will she. Chapter 1. The Night Everything Broke. The blood was still warm on her hands when Lena Ashford realized she was alone. Not just physically alone, though she was, standing in the middle of the Blackwood forest at 2 in the morning with nothing but a shredded dress and the smell of pine clinging to her skin. No, she was alone in the way that hollows a person out, the kind of alone that follows you into a crowded room and sits beside you at the table and breathes in your ear while you pretend to laugh at someone's joke. She had been rejected. On the night of her first shift, no less. She pressed her back against a massive oak tree, its bark scraping the raw skin of her shoulder blades, and tipped her head up toward the sky. The moon hung swollen and merciless above the tree line, pouring silver light down through the gaps in the leaves like it was laughing at her. 3 hours ago, she had been happy. Or at least, she had been close enough to happy that she hadn't known the difference. 3 hours ago, she had been standing in the Ashford Pack clearing in her best white dress, the one that her mother had hemmed by hand, the one with the small blue flowers along the collar, waiting for the revelation ceremony to begin. Every wolf in their territory was there. 63 pack members arranged in a wide circle around the sacred fire pit, their faces warm in the orange glow of the flames. She had stood at the edge of the inner ring with the other 17-year-olds who were shifting for the first time, her heart hammering so loud she was certain the wolves beside her could hear it. It was supposed to be the best night of her life. The revelation ceremony was sacred. It was the night a young wolf stepped fully into their power for the first time, and if the moon goddess was generous, it was also the night you discovered your mate, the person the universe had fashioned from starlight and intent, designed specifically to complement the exact shape of your soul. Lena had believed in all of it with her whole stupid heart. She had believed it so completely that when the shift began moving through her body like liquid fire, when her bones began their terrifying, beautiful rearrangement, she had thought, "This is it. This is the beginning." And then she looked up through blurring eyes, through the haze of transformation, and found him. Cade Whitmore, alpha heir of the Ashford Pack, 20 years old, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, devastatingly beautiful in the way only boys who have never been told no can be. He had been standing across the fire from her, and their eyes locked through the flames, and she had felt it, the pull, the golden cord that the elders described, the thing that couldn't be faked or imagined. Mate. The word bloomed inside her chest like the first breath after drowning. She had barely finished shifting, barely found her footing in her wolf form, still trembling and new and overwhelmed, when she had walked toward him on unsteady legs, drawn by something older than thought. He had looked at her for a long, terrible moment, and then Cade Whitmore, future alpha of the Ashford Pack, 20 years old, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, devastatingly beautiful in the way only boys who have never been told no can be, had looked her dead in the eyes and said the words that would rewrite the rest of her life. "I reject you, Lena Ashford, as my fated mate." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She remembered the feeling, a physical sensation, like someone had reached into her chest and seized the golden cord and yanked it out by the root. The pain was extraordinary, not metaphorical, actual, visceral pain that dropped her to her knees in the dirt in front of 63 witnesses. She remembered hearing someone gasp. She remembered the crackling of the fire. She remembered looking up at Cade's face and finding nothing there. No guilt, no hesitation,
just a clean, cold certainty, like he'd rehearsed this and was relieved to have it done.
Later, she would learn why. He had already chosen someone else, Priya Vas. Alpha blood, connected family, powerful lineage. A political match that would strengthen the pack's alliances in ways that a mate bond with an Omega girl from a mid-ranking family never could. He had known about the possible mate bond before the ceremony. An elder had warned him, and he had made his decision weeks in advance. He had come to the revelation ceremony prepared to break her, and he had done it perfectly. Now Lena sat at the base of the oak tree 3 hours later and tried to remember how to breathe. Her wolf form had receded when the rejection hit. The shock of it had snapped her back into her human body so fast she'd lost consciousness for a moment. She'd come to alone in the forest, her dress torn from the partial shift, her skin scraped, her chest feeling like it had been caved in by something enormous. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and pushed. Breathe. The forest was quiet around her, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that has teeth. Somewhere in the dark, something moved through the underbrush. Probably just a deer. Probably. She needed to get home. Home. The word felt strange now. Home was in the Ashford Pack territory, the Ashford Pack, where 63 people had watched her humiliation and said nothing, where Cade Whitmore would wake up tomorrow and go on with his life as though she were a footnote. She pulled her knees to her chest and made herself think clearly. She was 17 years old. She had no money, no plan, and no one coming to find her. Her mother had been in the circle tonight. She had seen her face in the crowd, had seen the flash of something desperate and helpless cross her features before the crowd shifted and blocked her from view. Her father had died 2 years ago. There were no siblings, no powerful family connections. There was only her and the moon and the sound of her own heartbeat slowly steadying in the dark. Okay, she thought. Okay. She was still alive. She was still breathing. The rejection bond had cracked something fundamental in her chest, yes. She could feel the jagged edges of it when she breathed too deep, but she was not shattered. She refused to be shattered. Lena Ashford pressed her back into the bark of the oak tree, lifted her face to the merciless moon, and made herself a promise. I will not spend one more minute of my life waiting to be chosen. The moon said nothing, but the forest seemed to exhale. Chapter 2. 3 years later. She was late again, and the coffee in her hand was doing absolutely nothing. Lena shouldered through the door of Crescent City's most chaotic farmer's market, the strap of her canvas bag cutting into her shoulder, her boots still damp from the rain that had started 20 minutes into her walk and showed no signs of stopping. Around her, vendors called out prices, children screaming about strawberries, and a man with a saxophone played something melancholy near the entrance that felt personally directed at her. She was 20 years old now, 3 years, 2 cities, and one very hard-won degree of independence away from the girl who had collapsed in the Blackwood forest, with her heart in pieces. She had left the Ashford Pack the morning after the rejection ceremony, walking out of her childhood home with a single backpack and her mother's tearful blessing, and approximately $40 in cash. She made it to the city by noon, found work by evening, a diner off the highway that didn't ask questions, and had built her life piece by piece in the years that followed, like a person reconstructing a broken vase in the dark, finding each shard by feel. She had never shifted again.
That was the part no one warned you about. A rejection bond didn't just sever the mate connection, it damaged the wolf side of you, dimmed it, muffled it, buried it under scar tissue. Lena could still feel her wolf, the way you can feel a limb that's gone to sleep, numb, present, unreachable. She had stopped trying to access it after the first year. The attempts only made the ache worse. She had built a human life instead, and she was good at it. She had a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She had 3 jobs,
Early morning shifts at a bakery, afternoon admin work at a legal office, and weekend waitressing at a wine bar downtown. She was saving. She was stable. She was fine. She was absolutely, completely, thoroughly fine. "Lena!" She turned. Wren was waving at her from the herb stall they'd agreed to meet at, her bright orange raincoat visible from approximately 40 feet away, which was the entire reason Lena had told her to wear it. Wren Delacroix was the closest thing Lena had to a best friend, which was saying something because Lena had spent 3 years actively avoiding close friendships the way other people avoided spoiled food. Wren had simply refused to be avoided. She was a human woman, fully, blissfully, uncomplicated human, who sold handmade candles at the market on weekends and had, within the first 5 minutes of their meeting, correctly identified that Lena was lonely and miserable about it, and had decided to do something about it. "You're soaking wet," Wren observed. "It's raining. I can see that. Why didn't you take the bus? The bus costs money." Wren handed her a small bundle of dried rosemary without being asked, because she'd learned that Lena found the smell calming, which was the kind of observational intimacy that still occasionally blindsided Lena with its warmth. "There's someone here today," Wren said, in the particular tone she used when she was trying to sound casual about something that was not casual. "At the new stall, by the north entrance." Lena looked up. "And he is outrageously good-looking, and he's been looking in this direction since I got here, and I think he might be your type." "I don't have a type." "Everyone has a type, Lena. Yours is tall, dark, terrifying, and emotionally complicated." "That's incredibly specific." "I'm incredibly observant." Wren tilted her head toward the north entrance. "Just look." Lena looked, and then she stopped breathing. He was standing at the edge of the market, with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his eyes, even from 40 feet away, even in the gray morning rain, trained directly on her. He was tall, not just tall in the way that registers and passes, tall in the way that reorganizes a space around itself, that made the people nearest him seem to drift slightly outward, like water yielding to a stone. He wore a dark coat that hung to his knees, his dark hair wet from the rain and pushed back from his face, and he had the kind of features that looked like they'd been composed with deliberate intent: sharp jaw, straight nose, a mouth that was set in a hard, unreadable line. He was unmistakably a wolf. She knew it before she could explain how she knew it. Some frequency she thought was permanently broken in her chest crackled to life like a radio finding signal, and every hair on her arms stood straight up. Wolf, powerful, dominant, and something else, something that made her stomach turn over slowly. Familiar. "Do you know him?" Wren asked close to her ear. "No," Lena said.
Which was the truth. But her wolf, the buried, muffled, silent part of her that she'd given up on, was suddenly very loudly awake, pressing against the inside of her rib cage like it was trying to get out. "Run," said the sensible part of her brain. "Stay," said everything else. The man's gaze didn't waver. He didn't smile. He didn't approach. He simply looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, like a man looking at something he'd been searching for long enough that finding it required a moment of very private adjustment. Then someone spoke to him, a large man at his shoulder, dark-skinned and serious-faced, saying something in a low voice, and the spell broke. He turned his head to respond, and Lena exhaled. I need to go," she said. "You haven't bought your lavender yet." "I'll come back. I need—" She pressed a hand to her sternum, feeling the old jagged edges of the rejection scar suddenly lit up and throbbing. "I just need some air." Wren's hand caught her wrist. "Lena, your eyes." "What?" "They're doing the thing." Wren's voice was careful. "The gold thing." Lena's free hand flew to her face instinctively, uselessly. She couldn't see her own eyes, but she knew what Wren meant. Twice before in 3 years, when her emotions had surged past a certain threshold, her wolf had briefly surfaced in her irises, a flash of amber in the gray. Her wolf had not surfaced for anyone or anything in 3 years, until now. She pulled her wrist free gently, offered Wren a reassuring look she didn't entirely feel, and walked in the opposite direction from the north entrance with her heart slamming against her ribs. She made it almost to the exit before the voice stopped her. Low, measured, carrying the particular gravity of someone whose words had never needed to be raised to be heard. Lena Ashford. She froze. It wasn't a question. Slowly, with every nerve ending in her body firing at once, she turned around. Chapter 3. The King. He was closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, which she did not appreciate because she had spent 3 years making herself small for no one. Up close, the impression of him was even more overwhelming. There was something about his presence that pressed against her senses, not aggressively, not threateningly, just there, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the air move differently than it does on flat ground. His eyes were the color of aged amber, with something darker moving behind them, and they were looking at her with an attention so absolute it felt like being read. "I have the wrong person," she said. Lena Ashford, born to the Ashford pack, Blackwood territory, shifted at 17, left the pack 3 years ago. A pause. Currently employed at 3 different establishments, living alone on the 4th floor of a building on Cresswell Street. The cold moved through her in a wave. "That's not unsettling at all," she said, and was proud of how level her voice came out. Something shifted in his expression, a barely perceptible fraction of movement at the corner of his mouth that might have been involuntary. "I'm not trying to frighten you." "Then you should work on your opening, because reciting someone's address to them unannounced is generally considered terrifying." "You're not frightened," he said, observational, not challenging.
She wanted to argue, but he was right, and something about his certainty annoyed her enough that she crossed her arms and looked at him straight. "Who are you?" He held her gaze for a moment, and she had the strange sensation of being weighed, not found wanting, but assessed, carefully, like something being evaluated for a purpose that hadn't been explained yet. "Kael Dawnridge," he said. The name landed like a stone in still water, and she felt the ripples move through her even before her brain processed why. Dawnridge. She knew that name. Everyone in the werewolf world knew that name, the way everyone knew the names of mountains and oceans, things too vast and permanent to belong to any one person's story, but present in every one. The Dawnridge pack held the Northern Territories, 300 wolves across 6 sub-packs, the largest single pack structure in the country, and at the top of it, for the past 4 years, since his father's death, the Alpha King. She stared at him. "You're the Alpha King?" she said. "Yes." "And you're at a farmer's market in Crescent City?" "Yes." "Reciting my address to me?" "I apologized for that." "You absolutely did not." She uncrossed her arms, recrossed them, made herself very still. "Why are you here?" He looked at her for a long moment, and the morning sounds of the market seemed to retreat, the saxophone and the children and the rain all pulling back, until there was just the gray sky and his amber eyes and the thing her wolf was doing in her chest, pressing and pressing like something that wanted desperately to be acknowledged. "Because," he said, "you are my mate." The word hit her like ice water. She actually stepped back, one full step, her heel catching on the wet cobblestone, her hand shooting out to catch the edge of a nearby stall. The vendor looked up, startled, and she ignored him. "No," she said. "Lena, no." Her voice was harder now, the way it got when something tried to move her, and she needed to make sure it understood she wasn't moving. "I was already someone's mate. That ended. That's over. I don't—" She pressed a hand to her sternum, feeling the scar tissue of the rejection bond like a fist squeezing. "That's not— You have the wrong person." "I don't,"
he said, with a quiet certainty that infuriated her. "Then your information is wrong. I've spent 2 years looking for you." "That's not," she started. "I felt the bond break," he said, still in that same low, measured voice, still looking at her with that unnerving steadiness. "My wolf recognized you before I knew your name." A pause. "It took me another year to find you. You covered your tracks well." She hadn't covered her tracks. She just ran. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you believe we're fated mates?" "I'm not telling you what I believe. I'm telling you what is. The mate bond."
Your previous bond was severed by a voluntary rejection from your mate. That's not the end of the story. It's a chapter. His voice stayed even, but something moved behind his eyes. The moon goddess doesn't waste materials. She repurposes them. Lena laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. "You have no idea what that rejection did to me." "No," he said, "I don't, but I'd like to." The sincerity of it was so unexpected that she went quiet. He didn't press the advantage. He simply stood there in the rain, this enormous, contained, powerful man who was apparently the alpha king of the Northern Territories, watching her with an expression that was careful and intent and something else, something that looked almost like it might be patient. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. "I'm not going back to pack life. I'm not asking you to go anywhere," he said. "I'm asking you to have coffee with me." She stared at him. "Coffee," she repeated. "There's a place 2 streets over." Another barely there movement at the corner of his mouth. "I've been waiting in the rain for 40 minutes. I think I've earned coffee." Chapter 4. What He Carried. The coffee shop was called The Pale Hour, which Lena privately thought was a bit much, but it was warm and it smelled like cinnamon, and the rain was still hammering the windows outside, so she sat down across from him in a corner booth and wrapped both hands around a mug of dark roast and made herself look at him directly. He was even harder to look at in warm light. Not because he was unpleasant to look at, the opposite, which was its own problem. But there was something about his face in the amber glow of the cafe that made him seem less like an apparition and more like a person, and persons were more dangerous than apparitions because they could actually hurt you. She had made a science of not letting people hurt her. "Say what you came to say," she said. He wrapped his hands around his own mug, black coffee, no sugar, which somehow she had already expected, and leaned forward slightly, his forearms on the table. "Your rejection bond," he said, "how long did it take to heal?" The question surprised her. "It didn't," she said, before she could decide whether to share that. "Not fully. It's still there, just quieter." He nodded, like this confirmed something. "The same bond prevents me from feeling my wolf fully. We're on opposite ends of the same broken thread." She hadn't known that. She hadn't known the Alpha King, any Alpha King, let alone this one, had been carrying half her damage for 3 years without knowing why. She thought about being cold about it. It would have been easy. She was very practiced at cold. "Does it hurt?" she asked instead. His eyes met hers, like a tooth needing pulling. She almost smiled, didn't. "Why didn't you just, if you knew, why didn't you contact me sooner? You said it took a year to find me." "I found you after a year," he said carefully. "I watched you for another year before I came." She set her mug down. "You watched me. I had people confirm you were safe, that you were," a pause, "that you were healing. I didn't want to come to you while you were still broken?" The words came out harder than she intended. "Still deciding who you were going to be," he said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very careful distinction. I'm a careful person. Alpha Kings aren't known for patience." "No," he agreed. "Most aren't."
"Why are you—" He looked down at his coffee, and for the first time she saw something shift in him, a small, private adjustment, like a door opening briefly onto a room that was usually kept closed. "My father wasn't," he said. "He was the kind of man who took things,
Whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. He believed that was what strength looked like. A pause. I spent a lot of years watching what that cost him, what it cost the people around him. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it, less tactical, more honest. "He's gone now," she said. She knew this. It had been in the pack news 3 years ago, the death of Kael Dawnridge, the old Alpha King, and the succession of his son Kael at age 24, young for the title, unusually young. "He is," Kael said simply. She thought about pressing, didn't. "So what do you want from me?" she asked instead, keeping her voice practical, grounded. "You've found me. You believe we're mates. Now what?" He looked at her steadily. "Now I want you to know that you have every right to say no." She hadn't expected that either. "If you want nothing to do with this, with me, that is your choice, and I will respect it. I will leave Crescent City tomorrow, and you will never hear from me again." His voice was level, but she heard something behind it, something leashed and controlled, and very much present. "But if there's any part of you that wants to know what this could be, if there's any part of you that wants to stop carrying that broken bond alone, then I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn your trust. Earn your trust. Not claim her, not demand. Earn." She had prepared several versions of no. She had them ready. They were good no's, firm and clean and final, the kind that didn't invite negotiation. She looked at Kael Dawnridge across the small table, at the careful stillness of him, at the way he held his hands around his mug like a man who had trained himself out of reaching for things, and she thought about the oak tree and the blackwood forest and the promise she'd made to the moon. "I will not spend one more minute of my life waiting to be chosen." She hadn't meant stop being chosen. She'd meant stop being passive, stop waiting, stop making herself small enough to fit into the space someone else designated for her. This was not that. This was the universe putting something enormous in front of her and giving her explicitly the power to decide. "1 week," she said. His eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "You stay in Crescent City for 1 week. No pressure, no pack politics, no alpha business. Just," she paused, searching for the right word, "normal. We're just people. And at the end of the week, I decide." A pause. "Decide what?" "Whether I'm even willing to consider this." She held his gaze. "Those are my terms." Something moved through his expression, something warm and complicated that he quickly, carefully composed back into steadiness. But she'd caught it, just a flash, like amber light through a cracked door. "Agreed," he said. They were not just people. That was the first thing she discovered. It was impossible to be just people when one of you was an alpha king with 2 security wolves that materialized at concerning distances and a phone that never stopped ringing with the business of 300 wolves' worth of emergencies. And it was impossible to be just people when every time they were within 10 feet of each other, the air between them seemed to develop an opinion about the situation. But he tried. He tried with a genuine, slightly awkward sincerity that she had absolutely not been prepared for. On the second day, he showed up at the bakery at 6 in the morning and spent 2 hours learning to fold pastry dough because she had mentioned once in passing that it was meditative. He was terrible at it. His hands were too large and too used to decisive actions, and the pastry kept tearing, and she had to physically move his wrists to show him the correct pressure. And she was absolutely not going to acknowledge the way her wolf went very quiet and very alert when she touched him. On the third day, they walked along the waterfront in the late afternoon, and she talked about her father, something she almost never did, and he listened with the particular quality of attention that makes a person feel like they are the only thing in the world worth looking at. On the fourth day, it rained again, and they stayed in her apartment because the coffee shop was too loud and going out seemed like too much effort, and he sat on her small sofa and read one of her books, an actual paper book, which he handled with careful, slightly formal hands as though he didn't read paper books often, while she did her admin work at the kitchen table. And there was something about the domesticity of it that terrified her more than anything else so far, because it felt easy. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She had expected to feel pressured, watched, managed, the way she had always felt around dominant wolves, the low-frequency awareness that someone was assessing you for usefulness or weakness. She had expected to feel small. She felt the opposite. She felt, for the first time in 3 years, like the version of herself that existed in this apartment in Crescent City. Careful, independent, self-constructed Lena was not a lesser thing than who she used to be. Like she was not hiding. Like she was actually, genuinely, startlingly fine. And he did something to that, to the fine. He made it feel like a foundation rather than a ceiling. On the 5th night, she made the mistake of telling him this. They were on the rooftop of her building, which had a broken door lock that no one had fixed in the 2 years she'd lived there, and which gave access to a flat expanse of concrete with a view of the city's lights and the black sky above them. She went up there sometimes when she couldn't sleep. She'd brought 2 blankets and a thermos of tea, and they'd been up there for an hour, not saying much. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed something from me." She turned her mug in her hands. "Alphas always need something. A strong mate line, political weight, pack symbolism. I expected you to be trying to manage me toward a predetermined conclusion." "I am trying to manage you toward a conclusion," he said. She looked at him sharply, and there was that fractional mouth movement again. "The conclusion where you trust me. That's the only thing I want." That's a strange thing for an alpha king to prioritize. He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the city. "When my father died," he said, "he left behind 300 wolves who had spent 20 years living in fear of him. Not respect, fear. They followed his orders because the alternative was pain, and they grieved his death because it was expected. And then they looked at me." He paused. "They looked at me like they were waiting to find out what kind of terrible thing I was going to be." She watched his profile in the dark. "It took 2 years before any of them would disagree with me in a meeting. 2 years before someone would come to me with a problem instead of trying to solve it in secret so I wouldn't know they'd failed. That's what his kind of strength built." A pause. "I don't want that. Not in my pack, and not—" He stopped. "Not in a mate," she finished quietly. He turned his head and looked at her, and in the darkness, with the city spread out below them and the sky enormous above them, his eyes were very amber and very steady and very human. "No," he said, "not in a mate." She looked at him for a long moment, feeling the week behind her, like a country she'd traveled through without fully understanding the landscape, and the thread between them, not golden, not the glowing cord the elders described, but something quieter and more complicated, a thing built in 6 days of paper pastry dough and rooftop tea and careful honesty, and she made a decision. Not the big decision, not yet, but the decision to stop pretending she wasn't already making it. Chapter 6. The Fracture.
The 7th day didn't go the way she'd planned. She woke to her phone ringing, an unknown number, which she almost didn't answer, except that something in her chest pulsed sharply right before she picked up, her wolf flickering awake with an urgency she didn't understand. "Hello?" Lena. The voice was familiar in the way that terrible things are familiar, the way a scar knows the shape of the knife. "It's Kael." She went absolutely still. "How did you get this number?" Her voice came out flat. "That's not important." His voice was the same as she remembered, smooth, assured, the voice of someone who had never spent a significant period of time not getting what he wanted. "I need you to listen to me." "I'm going to hang up." "Kael Dawnridge is in Crescent City." She said nothing. "I know," Kael said. "I know about the mate bond, the new one." A pause that she suspected was calculated. "Lena,
You don't understand what you're getting involved with. The Alpha King, don't, she said. He's dangerous. You rejected me in front of 63 people and called it efficiency, she said. You don't get to call anything dangerous on my behalf. A silence, then. There are people who would use you against him, Lena. People who would hurt you to destabilize him. Do you understand what it means to be the Alpha King's mate? You don't become protected, you become a target. She ended the call. Then she sat on the edge of her bed in the thin morning light and pressed both hands to her face and breathed. Her wolf was loud now, not the buried, muffled static of the last 3 years, but a clear, sharp frequency, like a signal finally finding its full range. It was a specific feeling, not alarm, not fear, something older, recognition. She knew what Kael had intended with that call. She had been managed by skilled people before. She recognized the shape of an attempt to make her afraid, to make her small, to make her doubt her own judgment in favor of someone else's narrative. She also knew that the things he'd said were not entirely false. An Omega girl from a dissolved pack, no political weight, no lineage, no power. As the Alpha King's mate, she would be scrutinized, targeted, tested. There would be people who would try to break her just to see if he would break too. She sat with that for a long moment. And then she stood up and got dressed because she had something to say and she was done delaying. She found Kael at the coffee shop, the Pale Hour, which had somehow become their place over the course of the week in the way that places become yours without announcement. He looked up when she walked in, and something in his expression shifted, not alarm, but attentiveness, reading her the way she was starting to recognize he read her, like she was worth reading carefully. She sat down, didn't order anything. Cade Whitgore called me this morning. His face went very still, not cold, still, the way deep water is still. I told him about the political pressure your pack is under, about what it means for you to be bonded to someone like me.
Someone like you, he repeated very quietly. Omega bloodline, no pack affiliation, no political value. She held his gaze. He wasn't entirely wrong, was he? Kael was silent for a moment. Then, no, he wasn't entirely wrong. She appreciated the honesty enough to keep going. I want to know if what you're offering comes with those costs. I want to know them clearly, not because I'm afraid, she said before he could say it, but because I've spent 3 years building a life that belongs to me, and if I'm going to offer any part of that to someone else, I need to know what I'm offering it into. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. My pack elders have been pressuring me to take a chosen mate for 2 years, he said, someone with political value, alliance potential, a strong bloodline. I have refused every suggestion, not because I'm romantic about it, the corner of his mouth moved, though I appeared to be more romantic about it than I thought, but because I was not willing to build a partnership on a foundation I didn't choose. You chose this? The goddess chose this, he said, and yes, so did I. Even knowing what it costs you politically? Lena, he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. I have 300 wolves. I have territory, resources, and 4 years of pack loyalty that I built from the ground up out of my father's wreckage. I am not weak. Whatever enemies come, a pause. I am not asking you to come into a situation you can't survive, but I am not going to lie to you and tell you it's without risk. That would be its own kind of rejection. She looked at him, at the steadiness of him, at the carefulness. Here's what I can offer you, he said. Full truth, always. Whatever my pack is facing, whatever enemies move against us, you will know. Not because you need my protection, but because you deserve the information to make your own choices. His eyes held hers. And if at any point you decide the cost is too high, if you need to step back, I will not make that decision into a punishment. She felt something in her chest that she'd thought she'd forgotten how to feel. Something warm and specific, not the blazing intensity of first love, but something deeper and stranger,
like the foundation of something, the first stone of a thing that intended to stand for a long time. "Okay," she said. He waited. "Okay," she said again, more clearly. "I'm not going anywhere." The breath he released was so small she almost missed it. Almost. Chapter 7. What Blooms in Dark Soil. The first time she shifted in 3 years, she was alone. It was a week after Kael had gone back north. Not gone, exactly. He called every evening, and there were texts throughout the day, and the knowledge of him was a constant low warmth in the part of her chest that had been cold for so long she'd thought the cold was just her. And she'd gone to the rooftop at midnight because she couldn't sleep. The moon was full. She hadn't planned it. She'd been standing there, looking at the city, feeling the new warmth in their bond. Not the golden cord the elders described, not yet, but something growing slowly in that direction, and her wolf had simply risen. Not violently, the way it had at 17, not in pain and shock and too much all at once. Gently, the way water rises in a well that has been dry for a long time. Slowly, and then all at once, and then incredibly beautifully full. She shifted. The pain was there. It was always there. The bones were always their own specific kind of terrible. But she went with it this time, instead of fighting it. And when it was over, she stood on the rooftop in her wolf form in the full moon's light and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like a complete person. Her wolf was silver gray, which she'd seen only once before, briefly, on the night of her revelation ceremony, before the rejection snapped her back. She shook out her coat, tested her legs, looked up at the moon. "There you are," she thought. The moon said nothing.
But the warm thing in her chest pulsed, once, twice, and she knew, though he was 200 miles north, that Kael had felt it. Her phone was waiting when she shifted back. One message. "Kael, are you all right?" She smiled. She actually genuinely smiled, alone on a rooftop at midnight. "Lena, better than all right." A pause. Then, "Kael, your wolf is beautiful." She stared at the message. "Lena, you can feel what I look like?" "Kael, I can feel what you feel when you look at yourself." It translated. She sat with that for a moment, the strange new intimacy of it, the way the bond was learning to carry information she hadn't known could be sent. "Lena, that's terrifying." "Kael, is it?" "Lena, you're going to know everything." "Kael, yes, and you'll know everything about me. That's the arrangement." She looked out over the city, at the lights and the dark sky and the moon hanging enormous and silver overhead, and felt the arrangement settle over her, not like a weight, not like a cage, but like the first thing in 3 years that had been built to her actual dimensions. "Lena, good night, Kael." "Kael, good night, Lena. Sleep well." She did. She went north on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were practical days, and she was a practical person. She gave 2 weeks' notice at all 3 of her jobs. She paid her last month's rent. She said goodbye to Wren over terrible wine, and watched her best friend cry in a way that made her own eyes go suspiciously warm, and she promised to call every day, which was a promise she fully intended to keep. She packed 1 bag, old habit, the same one she'd walked out of Blackwood with 3 years ago, and then, because she was different now, she packed a second one. The drive north took 6 hours. Kael had offered to send someone. She had explained politely that she had been driving herself places for 3 years and saw no reason to stop now. He had said, of course, without argument or persuasion, and that ease of acceptance still sometimes caught her off guard in its simplicity. She crossed into Dawnridge territory just after noon and felt it immediately, a shift in the air, a hum beneath the frequency of normal life, the unmistakable resonance of many wolves living close to their wolf nature. Her own wolf, newly restored, lifted her head and breathed it in. Pack,
her wolf said, in the wordless way that wolves communicate. Safety. The Dawnridge compound was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something austere, something that bore the imprint of the previous Alpha King, heavy, hierarchical, designed to impress through intimidation. What she found instead was a vast, sprawling property set into the base of a mountain range, built in a style that seemed to have evolved organically over time. Old stone and new glass, wide corridors that let in northern light, outdoor spaces that had clearly been designed for large groups of wolves who needed to move, to breathe, to feel the land beneath them. It felt like something tended, like something that had been brought carefully back to life. Kael was waiting for her in the courtyard. He looked different here, the same but fuller somehow, the way a person looks when they're in their own context. There was an ease to his posture that she hadn't seen in Crescent City, a settled quality, like a wolf fully in his own territory. He also looked at her like she was the most important thing in the landscape, which she was still figuring out how to receive.
"You made it," he said. "I said I would. You did." He reached for her second bag, not her first, she noticed, correctly intuiting that her first bag was not to be taken from her, and she let him carry it, and they walked into the compound together, and the wolves they passed looked at her with curiosity and wariness, and something else, something that slowly, over the course of the afternoon, she identified as hope. These were people who had lived under one kind of king and now lived under another, who had learned slowly and imperfectly to believe that things could be different, who were watching their Alpha King bring someone home and were hoping, quietly, that she would be worth it. She thought about the 17-year-old girl in the Blackwood forest. She thought about what that girl had promised the moon. "I will not spend one more minute of my life waiting to be chosen." She hadn't waited. She'd built herself from nothing. She'd become herself in the dark, with her own two hands, on her own terms. And she had walked into this, not because someone had chosen her, not because the goddess had assigned it, not because the politics of pack life required it, but because she had looked at Kael Dawnridge across a rain-soaked farmer's market and felt her wolf, buried for 3 years, silent and aching and nearly forgotten, press against her ribs and say, "Stay." And she had decided, with full information and clear eyes and the exact self-possession that 3 years of hard living had forged in her, that she agreed. She was not someone's consolation. She was not someone's political liability. She was not the girl who had been rejected in a white dress in front of 63 witnesses. She was Lena Ashford, unmated Omega, 3-job survivor, rooftop wolf, and she was exactly enough. The moon, apparently, had always known. Epilogue. 6 months later. The formal bonding ceremony was small, which was not traditional for an Alpha King. The elders suggested 300 wolves, a week of celebrations, an alliance dinner that would consolidate the Northern Territory's political relationships in one elegant gesture. Kael had listened to all of it with his customary patience, and then said no, which was apparently something he had never once said to his elders before, and which resulted in a week of fascinating pack politics that Lena had observed with a combination of amusement and genuine respect. In the end, 20 people, the inner circle, the wolves who had survived Garrett Dawnridge's reign and built something new in its aftermath. Wren, who was human and cried through the entire ceremony and wasn't even slightly sorry about it. The ceremony itself was at dusk, on a hill above the compound, under a sky that was going all gold and purple at the edges, the way northern skies do in autumn, like they're trying to outdo themselves. Kael held her hands, carefully, the way he always held things, like they had value that needed to be preserved, and looked at her with those amber eyes, and she felt the bond between them, no longer a broken thread or a muffled signal, but something whole and luminous and quietly extraordinary.
Last chance, she said. He looked at her, the fractional mouth movement. What for? To reconsider? Omega bloodline? No political value? Known troublemaker? The last one is a recent development. The first two I knew. The third one, he paused, and the warmth in his expression was